One of the things I like about owning and running my own sawmill, aside from getting fairly cheap or free material, is that I run across material every day that is not what you would find in a local lumber yard. This guy, for example, this is a little piece of what I believe is apple wood. It's not something that I would throw on my mill because it's not big enough, and I really like working with apples, so I couldn't let this guy just sit on the job site and get pushed into a burn pile. So when I have a small piece like this, it kind of screams to me that it needs to be turned into like a turning project. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to show you guys how I make one of these. And this is just a little live edge bowl, and it works really well for pieces like this that aren't real long. They're not terribly big in diameter, but we can showcase some of the natural beauty of the wood by turning a bowl that has bark still on the edge. And I think they look really cool, and they're nice little gift pieces. So let's take a look at this guy quick. This, like I said, I think is a piece of apple, and it's been sitting for a while. It has some checks on the end, and there's a crotch here that has a pretty good split in it. So we're going to try to avoid that as much as we can. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take this over to the bandsaw, and we're going to cut off, I'm going to work from this bigger butt end down here. And I'm going to make a couple of slices and see if I can get through all that checking. So I basically had to remove, let's call it 3.5, 4 inches on the end to get rid of all that nasty checking. But that end there looks pretty check-free, and this end here looks relatively check-free. We have one crack there that travels up that way and kind of makes a little pie or wedged shape on this side. So now what we need to do is decide how our bowl is going to come out of this thing. And what we want to avoid is we want to avoid this guy, and this is the pith of the tree. This is the very center of the tree. And almost always it's going to crack. So if we leave that in there, our bowl is going to crack. We don't want that. So we're going to make a slice either on either side of that and just remove it altogether. But we need to figure out if we want our slices to run this way or if we want them to run this way. And looking at this, because we have these little pie-shaped cracks over here, I'm going to cut along this way and this way. And I'm going to remove, let's call it an inch of material in the center. Okay, so now that we have what is essentially our bowl blank cut, we need to decide how we want to make a circle. So usually what I would do is grab a compass, set it to about the maximum diameter I can get out of whatever my blank is, and scribe that. But the problem doing that, and the problem, quite honestly, with cutting any live edge stuff at the bandsaw, is it's round. It wants to roll on you. So if we mark a circle on here and try to cut it with the bark side down, it just doesn't work very well. So instead what I do is I will lay this cut side down so it's pretty stable. I mean, my cut's a little off, but that's okay. We're going to true it up when we turn it anyways. But I also have a set of plywood circles, and these are just templates. I'll cut these whenever I need a new size. So I think I have a 6-inch and a 7-inch diameter here. And what I'll do is I will position that on my blank, and then I will just use a little finish nail. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And I'll just pound that in to the bark side of the blank. And what this does is this gives me a target to cut to. I want to cut around and remove the waste, but not touch the plywood circle. So from the bandsaw, we're left with a pretty round blank. I went ahead and used that nail mark for my template to center up a drill bit and drill through really the bark layer and the cambium layer. I want to get down into some good solid wood, so our drive spur has something to bite into. Now I am going to mount this with the drive spur. You could use a faceplate and screw it in. You'd probably have to clear off some area or wedge the faceplate to get a good solid grab, or you could use a drive screw in your chuck, but with a blank this small, I'm going to use the drive center. So we'll go ahead and locate that in there, and we'll pound that in. Okay. And now we can mount it. Slip that guy in there. We'll bring up our tailstock. And I'm going to lift up the blank until it looks like the tailstock is roughly centered. And we'll give it a spin and see where any high points or low points are. And I like to use the tool rest for that. I can kind of position it and just watch the gap between the tool rest and the blank. And we can remove the tailstock and make minor adjustments as necessary to positioning. And really all we're doing here is looking to get this blank as centered as possible. We will true it up, but we can do ourselves some favors by using the tailstock to position everything. Okay, so tailstock is locked in. Let's talk real quick about the tools I'm going to use to turn this entire bowl. So the first two that I'm going to use are these bowl gouges. And these are what's called an Irish grind or Ellsworth grind. They have a swept back wing, and they're ground at about 60 degrees, and they're versatile. I'll be able to do pretty much the entire bowl with these two tools. But I will also use a parting tool. And for some of the interior cleanup, I may switch over to this little cup cutter. This is the Jimmy Clues Mate tool. It's really just a sharp carbide cutter, and this will help me get a good smooth cut on the inside. We might not need to use that. But then I'm also going to use a chuck, and this is a scroll chuck. I have some fairly small jaws installed, and we will create a tenon to fit inside of here after we're done shaping the outside of the bowl. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna grab a bowl gouge. It doesn't need to be a big 5/8 one like this one is, but this will remove a lot of material quickly. So I'm gonna make a push cut and true up this outside face, and then I'm going to start forming the outside shape of the bowl. Okay, and as I hold my hand on it while it's running, I can feel there's one flat spot still, but it might actually be the bark. So we'll shut it off and check it. Okay, so we're round all the way, and there's that flat spot I'm feeling. So we're gonna make another cut. Looks about probably only 1/4 of an inch or so. So we'll shut the lathe off before we move the tool rest. And now we're going to start creating a 45-degree corner, basically from about 1/3 of the way into the bottom of the bowl, about 1/3 of the way up. Okay, so there's that chamfer or bevel. And now I'm just going to true up this bottom just a little bit before we start making any more cuts. Okay, we have a little bit of a knot here, but I don't think that's going to be that big a deal. Now, we're going to bring our chuck in, and we're going to create a tenon. for this chuck to grab onto, so the tenon's going to go on the bottom of the bowl. And to do that, I'm going to use a set of dividers, and I'm going to reach clear down into the bottom of this chuck, and I'm going to set these dividers to be the width of the bottom of the jaws. These jaws are dovetailed, so they're wider at the bottom than they are at the top. They're a little bit narrower up there. So we'll set them to the maximum width of the jaws, which is about right there. And then we're going to come in here with the lathe running, and we're going to mark where our tenon is going to go. And we're going to only let the left leg of the dividers touch. If you let the right leg touch, these are going to flick out of your hand really quickly. Okay. So that shows me where my tenon is, and now we can really start forming the shape of the bowl. And you can do this with a push cut around the outside, or you can come in here with a draw cut. And I like the draw cut for something like this because I can watch the shape of the bowl develop, whereas with a push cut, I'm out of the way and I can't actually see the shape. So I'm going to go ahead and form the tenon right now, and I'm going to do that just with my bowl gouge. I'm going to push straight in so that tenon's going to be square, but then I'll come back in with my smaller bowl gouge and cut that little dovetail on there. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to pay attention to where I want the foot of this bowl to be. Now, a good rule of thumb is the foot of the bowl should be about 1/3 of the diameter. So we'll probably go about, let's call it 2 inches on this, give or take. For the foot. Okay, so right now I have the tenon made, and I've outlined where the foot, so that'll be the final location of the foot. So now I can go in with my bowl gouge, come in here, and I want this curve on the outside to end up right where that foot is. So I'm going to take that curve right into there and smooth it out with some shear cuts. Okay, so I think I like that shape for the most part. Now the one thing about a pull cut that I don't necessarily like, I like that I can see what's happening to the shape as I perform the pull cut. But what I don't like is the pull cut doesn't necessarily leave the most smooth, perfect finish. So if we look at this, we can see here we have a little bit of end grain coming out the side of the bowl, that we have a little bit of tear out. And likewise on the opposite side, we also have that little bit of tear out from that end grain. But we can make some finishing cuts to remove most of that before we start sanding. And to do that, I'm going to make what's called a shear cut or a shear scrape. And instead of working with the handle at about waist level and the wing of the gouge meeting that bowl at, let's call it a 60-degree angle, I'm going to drop that handle really far, and this is going to meet the bowl at a much steeper angle. And what this does is it creates more of a shear cutting action than a scrape like a pull cut does. And you'll notice when you do this, you get wispy little thin angel hair-like shavings instead of these big chunky guys that come off when you do the pull cut. Okay, so that smoothed out a lot of that tear out. There's still a little bit there, but this is pretty green wood, and I have that branch coming out right here. So I think we're at the point where I can probably start sanding this with about 180 grit, and we'll go ahead and sand this bottom pretty much up and through the grits, and I'm going to seal it with some sanding sealer, which is basically just thinned down shellac. When it comes to sanding bowls on the lathe, or sanding anything on the lathe for the most part, I prefer to power sand when I can. And I use this guy. It's just a cheap right-angled drill that I picked up from Harbor Freight. I think it was 20 bucks. And it works really well for the outside of bowls and especially for the inside. And I like to use these little foam or rubber pads, and they come in different diameters. This is the 3-inch. I have some 2 inches that I'll probably use on the inside. And then it's just Velcro backed sandpaper that flips on there. And then I'll turn the lathe on, and I'll usually keep the speed pretty low. If you have the speed too fast, your sandpaper actually ends up skipping over high spots. It'll skip off of the high spots, and then those low spots don't get sanded, and you'll actually create kind of a ripple effect, which is what we don't want. So I'll usually sit around 200, 300 RPM. And then when you're sanding, make sure the drill or your sander is going the opposite rotation of whatever is on here. So a lot of times I'll flip the directions on the drill when I come down to the base versus over here on the top. But I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So now I'm going to go ahead and seal it. And to do that, I'm just going to use a sanding sealer. And this is just the sanding sealer you buy in the can. It's shellac basically, but I've thinned it down with a little bit more denatured alcohol. And we'll just give that a good coat. It's going to soak it up pretty readily. And I might do a couple of coats of this just to really harden up some of those fibers. And a lot of the times doing this, it is sanding sealer after all, it makes sanding a little bit easier. So if you have any areas of tear out, they'll show up here when you put the sanding sealer on. You can a lot of times come back and start with probably 240 grit and get those to go away once you've applied the sanding sealer. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm not going to worry about oiling it right now. I'm going to have to oil the inside later anyways, so we will oil the entire thing in a bit. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make sure I saturate this bark. That stuff likes to soak up this shellac, and I'm going to seal that in really well. And if you notice, when we start turning the inside, if you notice that you're doing one of these and the bark seems like it is separating or wanting to separate from the bowl, you can actually use some super thin CA glue. Just use the thin stuff. But by soaking everything with the sanding sealer, you'll avoid the CA glue staining the wood if you do have to glue that bark down. So I always like to give this a good coat, just preventative, in case I have to pull out some CA glue in a bit. Now we're going to give that a minute to dry, and then I will pull it off the lathe. I'll install my chuck, and I'll get the bowl mounted with the tenon in the jaws. When you're mounting a bowl in the chuck, you want to make sure that you have pressure right in the very center. And luckily with this, we have that hole I put on the top for the drive spur. So a lot of the times what I'll actually do is I'll bring the tailstock up and put pressure up against the bowl just to make sure it's seated fully in that chuck. But I went ahead and removed the tailstock. It will honestly just get in the way as I'm hollowing this. So I will just put some good pressure in the center, tighten her down, and then always tighten both of the keyholes on a chuck. There we go. Okay, and because the live edge on this, I think it's kind of cool, is higher on this side than this side, we're going to have kind of a sloped effect on the bowl when it's finished. I think it'll be kind of cool. But we do have to watch that. If I get the tool rest any closer, that's going to hit. So whenever we make an adjustment, we're going to shut the lathe off, adjust the tool rest, spin it by hand, make sure nothing's going to hit, because we want to maintain the integrity of this live edge. So that looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do first is I'm going to remove just a little bit of this central area. But then, especially with live edge stuff, I'm going to come in with a parting tool, and I'm going to make basically a rim mark. I'm going to make a mark where my rim is going to start. It's going to give me a good clean entry point. And then I'm going to work the bowl wall thickness back to that mark. Okay, so after hollowing, it's really the same process as the outside. I got through the hollowing part of it. I used a combination of bowl gouge and then this mate tool, and that really helps me get a good, even, smooth curve. Now with thin wings like this, these are probably about 1/4 of an inch thick. They're pretty rigid. If they're any thinner, I wouldn't try to use this, but a negative rake scraper like this guy works really well to blend any marks on the inside that you have. A lot of the times with the bowl gouge, as you're trying to make that turn towards the bottom third of the bowl, the heel of the gouge starts rubbing and you get a little bit of chatter marks. So the negative rake scraper in there really cleans that up nice and easily. But again, if these were any thinner, I probably wouldn't try it because there's just gonna be some vibration issues. And alas, the best laid plans of mice and men, I did lose a little bit of my bark. As I was sanding and doing my final cuts, I saw it fly off, but I did grab it and save the parts of it. So what I'm gonna do is let this bowl really dry, because this is wet wood. So I'm gonna let this dry for a couple of months and see what happens to the rest of the bark. It might pop off, it might stay on there. If it stays on there, I'll leave these guys just on the inside of the bowl as it's sitting on the shelf at home. And if the bark stays on, I'll glue these guys back in place. And at the same time, what I will do is I will leave this tenon on there. And once it's dried and moved completely where it wants to, I'll go ahead and whack that tenon off with a chisel and then sand this foot nice and flush. Sometimes if this warps badly enough, I'll actually undercut that a little bit. I'll just go in there with a Dremel tool, with a little burr tool, and make kind of a texture on the inside of that foot. And then it has the added benefit of making this thing sit nice and flat if it is warped. But overall, that's a nice way to save a little log from the firewood pile and you up with a pretty cool little project.